as a way of background to the project is that ABARES currently publishes the productivity for agriculture, and this is done at national and state level, and there is no information whatsoever about how the regions are performing, whether for broadacre or for data. Sometimes last year they made a major overhaul of their data model, whereby they looked at what they've been doing over the last couple of decades and tweaked it, and part of those results were published and presented during the Outlook conference that was held in March. We've been engaging with them, partly to understand what's going on with the productivity analysis at ABARES, but also trying to sort of get data about the way different data regions in Victoria are performing. And by that we mean the Northern Victoria, Gippsland, and Southwest. And our thinking is that the performance will be different because those are entirely different production systems that have different physical and financial characteristics, and therefore the productivity performances should be different. And that is informed by some study that we did using the farm monitor project data, which is a joint project between Data Australia and DPI that has been collecting data on financial data and physical data on data farms in those three regions. And what we saw is that there was quite some different productivity traits in those three regions. The only shortcoming is that their time series is quite short. It's like about, this is the 6th year, by the time we did it was about 4 years. And for you to be able to do any meaningful productivity analysis, you need a little bit longer data series, and that's why we approached ABARES. Fortunately for ABARES, they have data that goes back to 1988. The only challenge was to get that data from them because one, they haven't been publishing, they haven't been separating to regional levels, and second thing, for them to give you that data has taken us quite some time, and has sort of involved a lot of discussions with them. And what we did then is that we've been able to sort of get that data disaggregated by those three regions, but also collapsing the southwestern Gippsland as dry land data production system, excluding the Macalester irrigation district, and having the northern Victoria minus the small bit of dry land farms in those areas, so that we can be able to compare the productivity traits for irrigated data versus the non-irrigated.
Try clicking.
In terms of data industry, I think, and this is why we have had so much focus on it at DPI, is that it's a very important industry for the Victorian economy. It's one of the largest, actually it's the largest industry in Victoria. As you can see, its contribution to the total exports is about 21% of the 9.1 billion. And all that is exported to over 100 countries, and those data exports represent about 86% of all the data exports from Australia. The only challenge is that, and this is based on what previously was published by ABARES, productivity growth in data has been slowing down. If you looked at whatever ABARES published last year, nationally it was like about 0.2 and 0.1% annual growth for Victoria. And that is a major concern because, of course, productivity is one of the ways that you can sort of continue improving your competitiveness, especially considering that you're an export-oriented industry. And it also, in a way, impacts on farmers' profitability because they are constrained in terms of the resources they have, land and water. And the only way they can continue getting more output from their land, of course, is through improving their productivity. And of course, there are impacts that are caused by external factors, whether you're talking about climate change or climate variability. That is also contributing to that particular slowdown. with that background then, one of the things that the government is currently doing is having this focus that has said that we want to double the food and paper production by 2030. And to achieve that, they're investing a lot of money in activities aimed at improving productivity, boosting productivity in Victoria. And that package is about $61 million in the next 4 years. And part of that, a large chunk of that, about a quarter of it is going into activities or programs and policies aimed at improving the data industry. If you're going to do that, then it is important that you understand your baseline, which is your current levels of productivity, so that you can be able to look at the drivers that are affecting your productivity performance, and therefore come up with strategies that can be able to help you improve on that. This is to show the contrast between the old productivity data as per the old ABARES model and what they've done now. So what happened is that they engaged David Aares. I don't know whether he's here. That's what I had. Nice to meet you. But basically what happened is that, correct me if I'm wrong, is that they overhauled their model, and these are some of the things that they were able to change. And we haven't had any much details about how that was changed. They said they're still developing a compendium that will sort of explain that. And based on that change, if you look at this graph here, this was where the inputs were before those changes. So this is what you'd have seen last year in terms of the input usage levels. That's what would have been the outputs. And this is for, we're just comparing Victoria and Australia. And down here, this was the productivity that I mentioned, which was about 0.2, 0.1. With the new changes and with the productivity data that they have published this year, then the productivity, the inputs are trading at this level. You can note that huge difference there. And the outputs at this level, and the productivity numbers have changed. So essentially it's changed. Like if you take for Australia, the TFP growth was 0.5 as of between 1988 to last year, and the current one is about 1.5. Similarly for Victoria, it was 0.2, and now, based on what we published in the agricultural commodities, is 1.2. And the challenge is that now you can't be able to compare what they've previously been publishing with these current figures, because it will be comparing apples with oranges. So you can't say that the growth has improved from 0.2 to 1.2. In terms of the data that we got from them, one of the key things we did was to compare Victoria and other key states. And as you can see here, what's happening is that the productivity levels here were more or less moving in tandem. But since about 2000 thereabouts, I think the Victoria productivity has been moving at a slower pace than the other states. And we understand that partly is because of deregulation, whereby the Victorian farmers were already efficient, and therefore the scope for productivity gains were far much less than what was in the other states, which were less efficient. And I think that also led to the exit of some of the inefficient farmers. And because of that, that's why you see that difference. It's not that all of a sudden the Victorian productivity growth has gone down. It's only that the improvements in the other states have actually been able to, because of the regulation and what they did last. And by the way, feel free to interject and ask questions at any point. In terms of our area of focus is these three areas. So basically what we've done is to get those productivity numbers at state level disaggregated by these three regions. ABARES hasn't done this in the recent past, to the best of our knowledge. We don't know whether it has been done, but we suspect it hasn't been done. And what we've done is that we are focused on Southwest. And here in Gippsland, what we've done is that we've assumed that this is mainly dry land. dairy production system, and remove the McAllister farms in that particular area, so that you don't have that effect of irrigation and the other farms. And the same thing here, there are a couple of dryland farms that were in the sample of northern Victoria. So if you included them, basically it sort of disturbed the balance for the irrigated dairy here. And this is the one that I showed for Victoria. And basically what's happening is that from around here, 2000, you can see productivity which is in, where is productivity here? Here, about here, it's more or less been flat. And we believe there's some good explanations as to why that has been. And once we disaggregate that, we're able to see that. This is the performance in terms of the productivity annual growth by regions. And what this tells us is that there has been a huge improvement in productivity growth in Southwest. So even though in the previous analysis we saw that the average state productivity growth was 1.2, in some of the regions the performance was better than the state average. And as you can see here, Southwest seems to be doing relatively better than the other two regions. And in Northern Victoria, it's more or less a little bit lower than both at 0.4%. If you look here, interestingly, what has happened is that the milk production between these 2 dates have more or less been constant. There hasn't been much change. Whereas in Southwest, there has been a major shift in terms of milk production. And in Northern Victoria, there has been a decline in terms of how much milk has been produced. And I was talking to Daniel Gilmore, and he was saying during the decade that there was a drought in the Northern Victoria, the milk production went down by 1 billion liters. And that is going to be reflected in the productivity numbers. And those reasons could be because of external factors outside what farmers can actually do. The other thing they've done, and they don't publish this, because at the end of the day, whatever productivity numbers you get, they're being driven by what goes into your model. So unless you're able to understand how those inputs are performing, it will be very hard to sort of explain the trends you're seeing in productivity. And what that means is that if you look at land, labor, and capital, essentially the purchasing factor productivity has been improving, which you'd expect, for instance, with capital, with the investment that farmers make in technology, having those data sheds and things like that, that would improve their productivity. Similarly, in terms of labor, we believe with the mechanization and with all the technology, you have fewer farmers or fewer employees working in these farms compared to the way it was about 3 decades ago. In terms of that, I think there are too many things here, and we haven't gone down into trying to understand what is causing these particular traits. That is the next stage of this one. And what we imagine is that probably it's too expensive to continue buying more land for you to be able to expand. And what you need to do is to be able to improve your performance in your land, whether you're improving the kind of pasture productivity that you do have, whether it's becoming more efficient with your water and producing more with the land that you have. That could be it. The interesting bit is the materials and services, whereby they're trading downwards. And again, there are reasons for that. I think in times when you have limited resources like water, especially with irrigation, what has gone up mostly is in terms of the supplementary feed, essentially. So basically that would explain it.
So, can I just interrupt? Does anyone not get their lunch? There's a spare type of salad. Everyone's happy? Okay. Sorry.
Francis, just a question. Materials includes purchased grain and other supplements?
Yes. I'll show it in the slide. And fertilizers. In terms of regional input usage, as you'd expect with land, it has more or less remained constant. Labor is trending downwards, as I've explained previously. But you can see here the rapid growth in terms of materials usage, especially since 2000. And I would imagine that this was the period when you had all those unfavorable conditions in the Iberian region, and this explains that. There could be other reasons that explain what could have been happening in this particular period. And what we are thinking then is that we need to segment this data in terms of different periods that we see major changes and try to understand what could have been the local drivers of that. At this level, we haven't gone into terms of detailed analysis, but we think some of the factors that could explain those trends, one of them is, of course, what happened especially in northern Victoria, whereby we think allocations in the last decade were less than they've been historically. We also think that rainfall across the whole state probably has also been below average, and that has affected pasture production. We also think that the increasing input usage is also impacting on that. It's okay, you've sort of increased your output dramatically, but that has been followed by a huge amount of inputs usage, especially materials and services. The other thing we think is that there has been some structural adjustment. We think if we look at the numbers in terms of the number of farms, they've been going down, which means that probably the inefficient or unprofitable farms have been exiting the industry. The fourth one is a tricky one, and it's very hard to get details about that, but the understanding is that overall and nationally, the R&D funding in agriculture has been declining, and with limited R&D funding, then the scope of your technology improvement also is limited, and that could be having an impact on productivity. Going one by one, in terms of average annual rainfall, what we've done here is to look at the rainfall by regions. So instead of taking the average for the whole state, we've gone to the rainfall district within these regions and to look at the historical averages in terms of the rainfall and to see whether there has been actually those particular reductions in rainfall, especially in the times when the productivity growth has been going down. And as you can see, okay, this is of course the blue one is long term, from the average from 1901 to 2010. The red one is 1989 to 2010, which covers the time that we are doing our analysis. And the last one, which is green, is the last decade from 2000 to 2010. And you can see over time, in all the regions, the rainfall has been below average. But the interesting thing is this one, which tells you the percentage of deviation from long-term average. And as you can see in all regions, and especially in northern Victoria, in the last decade, the average rainfall has been 14% less the long-term average.
But irrigation is supposed to solve the problem
for northern Victoria.
It seems the crucial thing is getting rain in the irrigation catchment, so
yes,
efficiency of water flowing dams.
Yeah. So, and that is related to.
And if it's a bit dry in the southwest, that's no bad thing.
Yeah. As long as you can get your water allocations.
Comments goes over too much rain.
Yeah. There's one that the one on water. In terms of materials, those are the materials that ABARES include in their model. So materials is aggregating all these, so seed, fodder, chemicals, fertilizer, and other materials. And then services is this kind of inputs there. And this is the annual growth in the usage of those materials. So you can see, for instance, in terms of northern Victoria, it's about 4.3, 4.7 there, and 4.9. And this is the point I was making, that even though milk production has been increasing over time, the increase in inputs has been dragging that productivity down. So in essence, the productivity growth we are seeing is a result of those two. mainly the increased meat production, but that is sort of impacting naturally on the productivity growth that they have expected with that particular kind of meat production. We were trying to think about how we sort of try to see the adjustment of what's happening to the farming community. And we picked on this one that shows, especially from around here, the number of farms in these regions has been going down. And that is either the inefficient farms or the unprofitable farms moving out or being bought out. The other one is in terms of the area operated. This hasn't changed very much in the last decade or so, except in the Southwest. And one of the things that someone mentioned is that in Southwest it's an interesting area. I have no background about it, but I've been told that there is a lot of investment from New Zealand. I think the land in Southwest is, the farmland in Southwest is cheaper than in New Zealand. And you have a lot of New Zealand farmers buying land. Is that correct?
I'm sure that's right. And also, just as John and I know a bit of those people have had to adjust out of the wool industry into something else. And on the margin of the southwest, it's expanded into high rainfall parts of the former sheep industry.
Yeah.
And when they expanded with best practice technologies, especially a lot of New Zealanders brought with them.
And further to that, that could also explain why in the last decade or so the productivity growth there is far much ahead of Northern Victoria, because you're coming as an investor and you've been practicing your dairy production in New Zealand. And if you're investing, and if you look at the numbers in terms of the capital investment, they are also quite higher than the other regions. And because, like you said, they're finding the best practice, you'd expect them to outperform the others.
Well, they take, it's a, what do they call it in New Zealand? A Southland conversion or something. Come in and they get a match set of milk and shed, land, number of cows, labour, unlike your structure in the golden button.
Yeah. And that is supported here because if you look here then, the milk yield is continuing to increase. So that tells you that these guys are able to get at least more per hectare from the investment in their technology and things like that. So some of the things that we're pursuing are those. With R&D, it's a little bit tricky because of two things. One of them is that there is a general understanding that it's been declining over time. So I was looking for data, but it's very hard to get data about that. So I'm using these figures from John Martin. And if you look at, this is in 2008, constant dollars, he says that the amount of investment by states has declined from 53 to 38%. And in actual amount, that means this 58% here was about $500,000 in 1995, and it's about $400 in 2007. So that clearly shows you that the amount of R&D funding that is going into agriculture has been declining by about 100. The other thing and the tricky thing about R&D is timelines. Basically, Professor Alston says that it takes about 20 to 30 years to achieve full benefits of the R&D. So what do you do in such cases? What you're thinking is that one of the best ways to get the best out of your R&D is to make sure that you undertake a rigorous benefit cost analysis of your current programs. And if they're profitable now, they'll be in the long run contributing to your productivity. Just to write down, and I'll be happy to receive your insights as to how we can improve this. I think the revised data shows improved productivity growth, which is good. The productivity growth differs across those regions. We'll be drilling into knowing those drivers, like what's happening, because when you do it at state levels, you miss out on what's happening like now in Southwest versus what's happening in Northern Victoria. And the segregation that you've done allows you to capture the differences in the regions. And of course, you can invest the best technology, you can invest in the R&D, but there are certain factors that will be outside our farmers' capabilities. You can't do anything about climate change other than improve on your risk management. I thank you for your attention.